So what is the topic of my talk? What is the title? It'll emerge, I presume. The Future of Psychology, Compassion-Focused Outcomes. It's a big title, big words. Let me break it down a little bit to give you some context. I got here from Israel in 2005. I came to California to get my doctorate in clinical psychology, thinking I'm just going to be a therapist person, ask people how that makes them feel and so forth. Coming from Israel, if you might have looked at the news recently or in the past 2,000 years, there appears to be some conflict. I didn't anticipate it, but my focus has been the cycle of violence, trauma, and aggression. It's just what emerged. I was lucky to have mentors like Dr. Phil Zimbardo, like Dr. Rony Berger of Israel, that really helped me look at these issues. Clinically, I was focused on the most traumatized and the most violent people in American society. So I had the honor of working with traumatized veterans, with gang members, with children involved with gangs, inner city kids suffering from trauma. All of them were angry. Many of them were violent. I tried to understand why that happened, tried to understand how we can offer them healing, and interesting conclusions emerged. For instance, when you sit with these people and collaborate with them to recognize that inside, despite the hardship, is goodness, that appeared to be an agent of healing. When you sit with these people and collaborate with them to realize that underneath their anger, there's pain, collaborate to show empathy, compassion, kindness for their pain, that appeared to be an agent of goodness, an agent of healing. The interesting conclusion that emerged is reducing the symptoms was not enough. It was good, but it was not enough. We needed to do more. The lesson was that we need to increase compassion and add that to the recipe of healing. I was lucky enough to get my postdoc at CCARE, led by Dr. Jim Doty. Currently, I'm a clinical supervisor at Palo Alto University, where I get to train doctoral students in compassion and develop more applied psychological interventions at CCARE. So what is this compassion stuff? Let me break it down some more. Definitions, we like those, right? So compassion can be a sensitivity to the suffering of self and others with a deep commitment to try and relieve and prevent it. Why you want to do that? There's so many different reasons for why that's worthwhile. I'm just going to share one of them. Seems like compassion is good for you. So compassion is strongly correlated with better immune system, better physical well-being, better psychological well-being. And I'll try and break it down some more to give you a little bit more context. Let me have a personal reflection, sharing that I've been in academic settings as a student, as a teacher, as a practitioner of healing for the last 13 years. Frankly, the deepest thing I ever learned is that people need a hug. So I've been keeping that for myself for a really long time because I don't want to do this kind of hippie talk if I try to go to scientific settings, right? That's an issue. I'm so grateful to Dr. Paul Gilbert, who I consider to be the world's leader on compassion interventions. The world's leader in academic context for compassion. He developed the Fears of Compassion scale. Gilbert essentially suggests that the root of our issue in terms of psychological well-being and also on a societal level is fear. Fear of trust, fear of connection, fear of kindness, in other words, fear of compassion. So the deal is that it breaks down three ways. You're fearful of compassion for others. You're afraid they might use you. You're fearful of receiving it from others. You're fearful of giving yourself kindness of compassion. And these three different versions of fear, these impediments to the flow of energy of kindness, if you will, are highly correlated with psychological well-being. Gilbert has demonstrated that multiple times in his studies in England. We're lucky enough to work with the brilliant Dr. Martin, who led us on a similar project replicating these findings in the United States. And what you see here essentially, and this is a project that Dan has led us on, working with 152 business students who are known for their compassion. And essentially Dan has showed with his work, see, data, slides, numbers, Dan has showed us again that these data hold water not only in the UK, all over the world probably, certainly the United States. We see that when people are fearful of giving to others, fearful of receiving from others, of giving to themselves, these correlates with stress, anxiety, and depression. So the whole idea of how do we offer people healing becomes a little bit different now. We're not just focused on the symptoms and bringing them down. We're actually focusing now on increasing compassion. This is not a clinical finding. This is not a non-clinical finding. This is not for children. This is not for adults. This is for everybody. And this is a human truth. When we're able to increase this flow of kindness, if you will, our psychological stance is better. We function better in this world. So I think it's easy to agree it'd be a good thing to do. The question is, how do we do it? What is our vehicle? How do we actually implement these kinds of ideas? Let me share with you a very simple three-tier kind of model. The first one is expert-mediated. I love psychotherapy, by the way. I think about it as the most special, most honorable thing I've ever gotten to do. I train doctoral students now at Palo Alto University how to deliver compassion interventions. Love it. I also got a huge problem with it. You know what it is? It doesn't scale. How are you going to get enough Dr. Somebodies out there to actually reach out to all of these people? How are you going to reach out to communities? How are you going to change the world by sitting in a quiet room and making that contact with people and offer them the healing? We need to do more. The second tier, very interesting, community engagement. Train the trainers. This is where we begin to actually cascade our interventions and share that with a larger number of people. The third tier, highly exciting, web-based interventions, using the internet, using the web to reach, essentially, I think, the world. So this part of the talk is where it begins to be really, really fun, at least for me, I hope for you too, is where I get to share with you about the wonderful work of wonderful people that I believe the 21st century will remember as the pioneers of psychological interventions and certainly compassion-focused interventions. Let me tell you about the first guy, Dr. Paul Gilbert, who I mentioned before. What a joy it is to be around him. It seems like the energy driving Gilbert's work is joy, fun, kindness for himself and others. He really practices what he preaches. He's faculty over at the University of Derby, wrote over 20 books, hundreds of articles. There's a reason for why he's booked 2-3 years in advance to do trainings all over the world. That reason is that his approach seems to integrate ancient wisdom with cutting-edge psychological data. He developed compassion-focused therapy, CFT. It's an approach that on the one hand is extraordinarily comprehensive, addressing these fears of compassion, if you will, letting us know that when we reduce our threat system kind of activation and increase our soothing and affiliative system, what happens to us is that our well-being increases, but also the well-being of those around us. What's really exciting for me about Gilbert's work is the fact that while it has been introduced as an expert-mediated type of model, we actually think that his ideas are worthwhile and could apply to multiple populations. We think that his ideas can scale. And currently, we're in collaboration talking with Dr. Gilbert about additional ways, in addition to psychotherapy training, to take these tenets, take these important principles and scale them up so we can share with more populations, again, both clinical and non-clinical. So this is Paul Gilbert for you. By the way, everything I'm going to say today is highly Googleable. So everything I'm saying, you can go into Google and learn more about it. It's very, very accessible. So open source is the goal here. This is the guy, the dude, Rony Berger, my dear friend and mentor. I'm proud to have known him for almost 10 years. Rony's talent is taking extremely complex ideas and sharing them with broad populations. He developed a program called Erase Stress, Enhancing Resiliency Amongst Children Experiencing Stress. His expertise, training groups of people who in turn train others, who then train teachers to work with whole classrooms. Over 60,000 children already received this service, improving on measures of stress, depression, anxiety, and so forth. Let me give you a small example of what that could look like. After the tsunami in Sri Lanka, Rony goes to Sri Lanka. He trains 40 mental health professionals. Each one of them trains 20 teachers. Each teacher works with 30 kids in a classroom. 24,000 children get the service within a few months with data to back up the efficacy of that kind of work. What is even more exciting is the emergence of Erase Stress Pro-Social. This is a project we're collaborating on with Palo Alto University, with CCARE at Stanford. Dr. Phil Zimbardo is our collaborator on this work. Essentially, we're taking what Rony has developed towards stress reduction, reducing the symptoms, and adding compassion increase, adding pro-sociality, reducing prejudice and hatred in very rough settings, and preliminary data showing that this could be very promising. So this is Rony Berger, and this is, I think, a marvelous example of the psychoeducational train-the-trainers community engagement type of model. Let's go on to the next tier, web-based internet applications. Dr. Ricardo Munoz. I've known Dr. Munoz for a little bit over a year. It's been a tremendous joy to meet this person. I think that Dr. Munoz is probably one of the most honorable people I've ever met in my entire life. When you sit with him, you feel the presence of goodness. You feel dignity. You feel humility. You feel competence. Munoz gets it done. His work all over the world, developing these web-based interventions. Prior to doing this work, he was the head of University of California, San Francisco Psychology Services. Currently, he's the director of Eye for Health at Palo Alto University. It is the Institute for International Internet Interventions for Health at Palo Alto University. Again, you can check out our website. He gives everything. So you can actually look at all of the manuals, all of the protocols that he has developed. His goal is to give psychology away for free to the people. His approach is unique. He uses cognitive behavioral ideas integrated with a strong emphasis on cultivating agency, cultivating choice for people, cultivating individuality for those that are receiving help from him. What's really special that's happening very recently is that we had Dr. Gilbert out here. CCARE and Jim Doty hosted him, and we got to have Dr. Gilbert talk to us at Palo Alto University as well. And now we're looking to basically weave compassion-focused perspectives into Dr. Munoz's brilliant work that, again, already reached 157 different countries. The agenda of Dr. Munoz is to blanket the world with healing and compassion, essentially giving for free interventions that would reduce suffering and increase compassion and engagement all over the world through these web-based interventions. Really special man. Another special man, my dear friend Dr. Dan Martin. We are so grateful to have Dan here as our host today. Dan is a tremendous guy. He's the professor of management at Cal State East Bay right here. You guys are lucky to have him. He's also a visiting professor with us at CCARE at Stanford. Dan's thing is taking data-driven ideas, social psychology, experimental psychology, clinical, and then weaving them into programs that work. His recent program, one out of many creative, innovative ideas that he came up with, is the Clear Mentor program. It's a peer-to-peer kind of program where you get young students to work with older students or senior alumni to get that kind of mentorship relationship. In the workplace, in organizations, young employees getting aid from senior employees, getting that kind of mentorship relationship. It is a way to bring relationships that are of caring, closeness, and kindness into settings that don't always have those kind of relationships. Not only does this enhance the kind of organization that people are working or living in or studying in, it also supports well-being, which is a beautiful thing. Last person, you might recognize this guy right here. What am I up to? So what I'm up to essentially is doing my very best to contribute to work emerging at all of these three levels. That is my personal dream. Recently, I developed this program, VBT, Values and Behaviors Tracking. It's a web-based program with the agenda of helping people make contact with what's alive in them, helping people make contact with their core values. That's the first piece. The second piece is inviting people to engage with kindness towards self and other. I share about this because I've come to the conclusion that this is the most important thing. If you make contact with your core, with what's alive in you, and you engage with kindness towards self and other, I think you've done a lot of what might actually facilitate healing and well-being as a human. The last thing I want to share with you is a personal reflection. Preparing for this talk ended up being kind of a meaningful thing for me. As you can see by this 9-year-old picture, I'm just a little bit younger than all these other people. And it's been an interesting process trying to understand what it is that I want to do in this world. And this talk, in a sense, preparing for this, really consolidated the kind of contribution that I hope to make. And I want to, again, kind of receive help or take advantage by the fact that all of you are present to make this public commitment. And my hope is really to make this pledge to you, to myself, to society, that I would like to spend the rest of my life focused on developing, implementing, and giving these compassion-focused interventions, ultimately to humanity, to millions of people around us. So that was my spiel. Thanks a lot for listening.